Hey folks, thank you for joining the DoD CIO Theater, Theater 5. Today we are showcasing software modernization. They will open up for questions at the end, but with that said, I'll turn it over to Dan Reisacker.
Hi. Thanks for coming to Theater 5. Thank you, Jen, for the introduction. You guys hear me in the back? All right. Speak up. My name's Dan Reisacker. I am sort of one of the policy wonks who works in the Directorate for Cloud and Software Modernization in the Office of the DoD CIO. Joining me in the panel, or the actual esteemed panel members, is Mr. Rob Vietmeyer, who is the actual director of that office, and my boss, the acting director of Cloud and Software Modernization, but also dual-hatted as the DoD's Chief Software Officer. And we have partnered in the DoD CIO's office with the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering and the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. And we have our cohorts in crime, Mr. Alan Dianchik, I tried so hard to learn how to say his name properly. And Sean Brady from the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. I guess probably the best way for me to let them introduce themselves. So, Rob, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, Rob Vietmeyer, Chief Software Officer, been in the government for a long time, Department of Defense, initial history in DISA with the Global Command and Control Combat Support System, NetCentric Enterprise Services, onto Forge.mil and Agile after I learned that the way we were delivering, or attempting to deliver IT was broken, and looking for the ways to, how do we need to modernize, right? So taking those lessons and then working within DISA to move us forward with Agile Development at the time, and starting some of the frameworks for use of open source and other software tools, and then also working, I think, the 3 initial cloud projects, right? So with one way back when in the beginning of cloud, which is called RACE, Rapid Access Computing Environment from DISA, Milk Cloud 1, and then Milk Cloud 2. So learned a lot from those experiences, and so now I have the pleasure of, in the CIO side, to continue that work with how do we move forward with cloud, how do we move forward with software modernization, and the 3 amigos here, right? So the 3 of us, with the support and commitment from our leadership in how do we move the department forward. So really realizing that in our early attempts to move the department from the CIO, from DISA perspective, it's often or almost always not a technology problem, right? And that the CIOs couldn't do it alone. And so realizing early on that we needed a team with others in the department, and specifically ANS and R&E. So it's been a great group and great run. So that's it for me. Rob.
Alan, why don't you talk about yourself a little bit? We'll get into, I'll let Rob talk too much. We'll get to those in our actual prepared slides later.
Okay, this is just an intro.
Just introduce yourself and talk about your background slightly so people have an idea where you're coming
Al
from.
Dianic, I'm the Director of Software Engineering and Prototypes in the System Engineering and Architecture Group. And we have a number of different directors for digital engineering, modeling and simulation, specialty engineering, systems engineering, and standards. And as a group, we're very interested in, there's a lot of overlap in our disciplines, and there's a lot of interest in modernizing across all of those. And they all look to me and say, well, how do I do Agile in system engineering? I said, well, let's talk about that. You need to do it. But my background is I've actually been back in government a little over 3 years. I was a contractor, a software developer for over 30 years. Did a lot of development for DoD, NASA, did some interesting work with UAVs, and generally had a lot of fun most of the time. Did some work in the IC, had a lot of experience with some of the benefits of cloud through C2S and how we were able to deploy some capabilities into an environment where normally we couldn't have gotten anything onto the desktop. So we were able to deploy some interesting prototypes and show capabilities. So I've really enjoyed a lot of that. It's a pleasure to work with these gentlemen. Forward thinking and always a lot of fun. And if I'd have known you were going to use the 3 amigos analogy, I would have brought a sombrero. But I don't have that. So
you got to come up with a sci-fi reference because you're our sci-fi.
There are just too many of them. Anyway, so thanks for coming today, and
Thank you, Alan. Sean, give us a few words about yourself. I said few because he's probably the most long-winded of the three.
Yeah, it's the gift of gab. I earned that from my mother, who's from Dublin, and my father from the Bronx. So I'm Sean Brady. I'm the Deputy Director for Joint Interoperability, and I'm the Senior Lead for Software Modernization. We're in the brand new organization, Acquisition, Integration, and Interoperability. And we have two jobs: DoD reforms that support modern interoperability and software acquisition that support the connected fight. But really the core of our mission is helping programs. So innovative pathfinders, accelerating operational experiments from the COCOMs or S&T prototypes into scalable acquisitions. That's the valley of death problem. But basically we're really focused on removing roadblocks from programs as we execute the software modernization strategy and getting buy-in from their stakeholders, and that's been a lot of fun. So if you're familiar with the software acquisition pathway, I led the development and publication of that. That's like the core operating system for modern software in terms of acquisition. And it's been really fun working that in the last 2.5 years to see that grow from a kind of like a startup company. We now have 52 programs in the software acquisition pathway. There are thousands of programs in the department, so we're really still in a learning phase in terms of moving the department to these commercial type development approaches. But I had a front row seat for transforming our processes and our people. So I was over in R&E. I was in Alan's job as Director of Software Engineering, and then I was Learning Director for Software Acquisition over at DAU, understanding that we really do have to, as Rob said, get after more than just the tech, the people and the processes. And so I supported the Defense Science Board study and the Defense Innovation Board study on software acquisition reforms. And that's where I really appreciated the fact that we've got to move out and get our processes aligned, and it's a lot of work to do. So a lot of those two core strategy documents from 2018, 2019 are now kind of flowed into the software modernization strategy, and looking forward to teaming with this group over the next couple of years to make it a realization. Thanks, Dan.
Sean got rid of milestones, acquisition milestones A, B, and C, no longer there. So
True story.
If those were always a problem, they were always a problem for me, right? Never worked, right? So
it's more of a lean startup model, right? Iterating,
Sean solved it.
build, measure, and learn.
5,087.
There you go.
And we cannot. You've definitely earned your pay for the next 20 years by doing that, I think.
Thanks, Dan.
To kind of set the stage in context, you kind of met these three different individuals, the three amigos, as Rob called them. I wanted to kind of just give an overview. We have been working for the last year or so, these three different organizations with a lot of other partners across the Defense Department, with military services, with CDAO, the rest of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Fourth Estate, on developing a software modernization implementation plan that really takes, and that strategy is now signed by the Honorable Mr. John Sherman, the DoD Chief Information Officer. The executive summary of that is available to the public. It's published. The link is up on the screen in the DoD CIO's library. The actual official version is not different in any noticeable way. We do consider that controlled unclassified information. It's available on Intel Link for DoD personnel and intelligence community and for our mission partners. The only real difference, I kind of want to foot stomp so you don't feel like you're being left out, is specific offices that are responsible for specific tasks and some of the timelines. So there's a few additional details that we think are specific to the way we do business. But the overall layout of tasks and all of the sort of important meat as to what are we trying to do in terms of software modernization is all in the public version. It says upcoming events as the April AFCEA webinar. That actually was obviously already happened, and then the second one that was this event right now. So I encourage you all to go read that if you haven't already, but we're going to kind of give you the lightning version of it today. There is an associated governance structure of how do we monitor and maintain this, how do we keep it up to date, what is the way forward in terms of how do we make that a sort of a living document with different sub-working groups and where are those things happening. That is largely driven by the Software Modernization Senior Steering Group, which is sort of has tri-chairs, sort of senior executives from the DoD CIO's office, from Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, and for Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Those are those sort of three tri-chairs, and again, we have participation at those meetings from across the department. Really, everyone's welcome if they have a stake in this. But underneath that, we have the Action Officers Working Group, which is really, I think, co-chaired by you three, right, by the three Amigos. But it also is sort of a GS15 sort of 06 level where we can have people come in on a more regular basis and talk about what is the specific things that are happening in the sub-working groups, right? So we have a bunch of sub-working groups that are trying to achieve the specific tasks that are in the implementation plan. One of those, Container Governance Task Force, I'm one of the co-leads for. Also a Software Factory Inventory Working Group, the API Working Group, which I think largely is Sean is in charge of.
Yeah, together.
Sean and Alan both. So the ongoing activities that are then feeding into that. We have not waited until this plan was signed. Those groups have been meeting for the past year, and so this gives us a mechanism to be tracking these things. We know what was going to be in the plan because we were helping write it, but in an organization as large as the United States Defense Department, coordination and getting everybody's input and making sure all of the ideas are being captured took a long time, as you may imagine. So getting the actual plan to signature took a lot of the last year. There are three major goals of this in the strategy, which is to accelerate the DoD enterprise cloud environment, establish a department-wide software factory ecosystem, and transform those processes to enable resilience and speed, right? These are kind of the three things. How do I get the cloud built in a way and make that happen? We already have cloud technologies, but how do I accelerate that and make it faster for people to use that to deliver capability? And then how do I enable a sort of modern software development practices and then use that to transform the processes? And so each of those three major high-level goals have a particular advocacy here at the table in this panel. So I'm going to let Rob talk about goal one.
Okay, thanks, Dan. And how much time do I have?
Why don't you each take about 7 to 10 minutes?
Okay.
And then that'll give us some time at the end for questions.
And just following up on Dan's comments on the iPlan, so the static version is already out of date. I know it was just signed, but we have moved it into Agile tooling now. We are not doing burn downs, but that's my goal for the team is we'll burn down against each of the tasks, and we're already have from the MilDeps the next set of tasks they'd like to see. We're working to officially close out tasks, add new tasks, but it's all now being supported by Agile tools underneath because we expect this to be a living plan, and we expect it to be updated and changed on a continual basis. So it's kind of interesting. We're as Agilists, we're going to live the Agile life even with our signed product. Okay, so cloud has been a topic of conversation throughout this conference. Of course, the big milestone for us was JWCC. I know there's been a lot of chatter on JWCC and where it fits into the ecosystem. Just to share my thoughts on it, and congrats to Sharon Woods and Ryan MacArthur on all the hard work they did to actually get that in place. Having built early clouds in the department, I think most people understand behind the scenes on what it really takes to enable a secure cloud for the department. There is a ton of work. And JWCC now gives us a lot of the contractual mechanisms and direct relationship to encourage this partnership and drive the partnership with our key vendors moving forward. So, behind the scenes, we actually have to peer the defense networks with our cloud providers so traffic can move back and forth. We've set it up so that in the cloud spaces, in the commercial environments, they look as if they are DISN spaces, so applicability of DoD IP address space and other things, so it looks as if it's eternal. We have built the command and control points for U.S. Cyber Command to have visibility over the traffic between us and them. And that's just on the unclassified side. Oh, also, network address translation. Some of our vendors won't accept all of the routes from the DISN, from NIPRNet. And so they force us to do natting. We're looking at how to optimize that right now with the DISA team. But right now, people don't understand if you're in the Defense Department, without the work that DISA has been doing and will continue to do, the cloud wouldn't work, right? And certainly on the classified side, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be brought to enable the connectivity, the data flow, the security in the classified domains. So, starting with that infrastructure really is behind the scenes sorts of things. And then building on top of that, the partnerships and extensions that we have with the military departments and the phenomenal work that they've been doing to really build out the cloud management offices to help give that roadmap for where we go from our legacy systems into the cloud environment. So I just want to say great work for JWCC to the DISA team, and that's really providing a core foundation. So and was one of the iPlan tasks that we've now closed out, right? So where are we going next? So I think the roadmap for the next step in cloud is really interesting. The first aspect for us is focusing on the edge compute challenge. Right now, almost all of the major cloud regions we're relying upon are in the continental United States. We have what I'll call expeditionary edge cloud, where folks will take small form factors and that's being deployed into the edge. What we see both within the department and with the experience with the intelligence community, that becomes inefficient pretty quickly, right? If you need to rent your own cloud hardware to take with you, there's a acquisition tail and delivery timeline. Then you have to operate and manage that cloud for yourself at the edge. What we're trying to do now, as the vendors are working on and have solutions for larger form factor compute that can operate outside of the full regions, we're working with the vendors now to deliver those capabilities into theater, but to take it in a different, the model a little differently, where it's going to be delivered as an enterprise edge node capability. So not under any one entity's account, right, and management. So it'd be available as a resource to anyone that needs to deploy AI, needs to get access to data, needs to deploy applications out to the edge, enable the combatant commands to have a enterprise capability there for their compute needs that can be interfaced with from the MilDeps or intelligence community and other partners. So really moving the edge from what is today sort of an expeditionary client by client type of capability to how do we get there to get an enterprise resilient edge computing capability. We do think that the MilDeps will still have responsibility for the expeditionary pieces and the tactical, the pure tactical cloud deployments, but then we'll start to supplement this with persistence compute storage within the AOR for them. Engagement with the vendors. Right now, the tools don't necessarily deploy in that model, right? They still want to be tied to an account. Many of these capabilities still want to communicate directly to cloud regions, which for us are all valid back in the United States. So as we're working through these models, you can start to see, like, we need to optimize communication so that we're not boomeranging traffic back and forth. So if we have folks that are in vendor A's cloud and vendor B's cloud, and both of those are synchronizing back to the continental United States, that doesn't work. So we've put in place with the vendors this challenge. It's, okay, folks, we need to be able to peer your networks with our networks in theater, right? We need to have data to be able to flow from one vendor's environment to another vendor's environment at the edge of this network. So that's the vision for that piece. Right now, we got delayed a little bit because we're building this out on the SIPRNet on IL6. And the accreditation for some of these components was coming out of the IC, and there were some delays. We were really expecting them to be done in December, but it just happened last week, at least for some of the devices. So that put us behind, but we are moving out right now in Indo-PACOM, and then also in Europe with some early proof of concepts on how this will operate, and then giving us that engagement model with the vendors where we're going to learn by doing with the end customers as we build out, and with this as we build out this capability. Next stage, and this will be my last, just real quick, is working with the MilDeps and DISA to start building out common platform features that become just part of a DoD compute fabric. So you can think about things like ICAM. How can I get GFUD replicated across the globe and just available in the cloud, so I don't have to build my own directory interfaces. I can bring identity ICAM solutions. I can build some more of the compute fabric capabilities that's tailored to the department's needs to accelerate our application deliveries on top of that. So we're working on those pieces, and so stand by for more as we have the cloud fabric. We're working to extend it and then to build on top of that this platform for defense compute.
Thank you, Rob. That was well stated. Let's move on to Alan, who will talk about Goal 2.
All right, thanks. So to jump directly off of that, when we talk about it's one of the benefits of cloud, for those who've been in the department, around the department developing software for a long time, we know that there's the concept of the software factory is probably just a workstation in somebody's office, right? Developing code, very standalone with some minimal integration. So one of the powers of developing this cloud infrastructure is to allow us really to evolve this software factory concept. Now, this is nothing new for people in the commercial space. Software factories are in significant use, but in DoD, that's still kind of a nascent activity. One of the great things about our approach, I think, is our partnership with the services. It's rather than being top-down directed, one of the key elements of the strategy in the implementation plan is really to partner with the groups doing it. There is an organic set of activities across the services to develop software factories. And so as they begin to learn their lessons, we can understand their needs, and we can help to promulgate that sort of across the department and have that inform the cloud offerings, the cloud infrastructure integration, so that we can really get the maximum power out of it. So in terms of we really look at this as being a software factory ecosystem, right? So that software factories can grow, evolve. They may involve entities that are in multiple locations for a number of reasons, one of which is employment. We see that in a lot of areas, for particular uses, it's hard to hire people in one area. However, we're able to create at multiple levels of security. There are examples of where we've been able to create virtual software factories integrating multiple entities. So what we want to be able to do is make that more systematic as opposed to just kind of a one-off activity for larger programs. So using the factory ecosystem that's able to operate at multiple levels of security, we're going to be able to integrate the efforts of multiple teams across department and across many vendors to be able to deploy capability more rapidly and more reliably. And a lot of this is really to drive out software more quickly. We all know that developing in the traditional sense was this long waterfall activity that was dependent upon very traditional milestones. Whoever has had to wait to develop code until after CDR, right? Oh, that's kind of insane anymore. You can start developing left of CDR and far left of CDR. So I think this will be able to leverage the ecosystem that our partners in CIO are helping to put into place. What we want to be able to do is make sure that we can characterize that ecosystem structure. What are the metrics? How does it need to operate? How does it need to be configured? How can it be interoperable across the broader ecosystem? How can we do direct delivery into operations? One of the keys for software is to be able to deliver it, do continuous integration, continuous delivery. How are we able to do that? Well, right now you really don't as much. There are pockets that are starting to do that. So we have to investigate continuous ATO. Well, that's something that we can help the departments with. How can we help make that some part of the ecosystem, right? Make that something that can be leveraged more quickly instead of, and there's some heroic efforts being done in the services there, and we're helping to work with them so they can teach us how they're doing it, because there's a lot of work going on there. So our job isn't really to tell them what to do, it's to watch what they're doing and bring that up and share those lessons with everybody. We want to be able to make sure that we have an inventory of digital assets across all platforms that's leverageable and accessible. We want to be able to make sure that we can make use of infrastructure as code. I think one of the things that we've seen for years, I remember dealing with software when we first started to have things like software-defined radio when I was involved in RF systems. and it's slowly grown. Now software-defined everything. There's really almost nothing anymore that can be completely software-defined and then flexibly deployed and flexibly changed. So infrastructure as code is going to be an important aspect, and we're wanting to make sure that we can facilitate the adoption of infrastructure as code. Obviously, the department for a long time is focused on a strong system engineering process with a focus on repeatable processes. What we want to be able to do is move that forward to be able to adopt these things rapidly so that we can move forward with an infrastructure as code deployment quickly. And not sort of wait for the normal gates. I want to make sure that the other thing is kind of moving forward with a digital engineering as a service concept. In software, one of the areas that my group is looking at, we call it shift left, is using model-based system engineering and digital engineering techniques to really move software engineering as far left as possible. I can remember the good old bad old days where you looked at a whiteboard, stared at it for a while, figured out what you were supposed to do and went down and coded it. Then that migrated into the great and sophisticated tool called Microsoft PowerPoint, and so we printed off lots of charts that didn't do anything, but they looked really cool, lots of colors. Animation, if you were really clever, right? You did the little animation with things flying around, and none of it was. I made somebody mad once in a design review. I said, "Where's the start button to make that run?" It's not real. None of it's real. And so with digital engineering, they can be real. We can model things using SysML very rigorously, and we can start to make those things available to the software ecosystem for any number of I can imagine just initially in an area like APIs. If we can fully model APIs and deploy code from the model, then we can make a systematic deployment of APIs reliably. There's a whole lot that we can do there with validating, assessing architectures, validating quality and security and resilience of architectures digitally, as opposed to, printing off a bunch of artwork and walking around a room until your eyes are bleeding, and then, picking off some areas where, you might have noticed something. It's not a really good way to do system of systems architecture. So that's an area of modernization that we're really working on. And so we want to, one of the things we want to really do is be able to work with DevSecOps and really advance DevSecOps in the department. As we know, there's the traditional software activity is very much kind of waterfall. So the whole notion of iterative development, and then it rolls down into testing. How do you do, for those familiar with the DT-OT difference, how do you do DT and OT simultaneously while you're trying to move software out into the field rapidly, right? Normally OT comes at the end, and it comes months later. Well, that all needs to be accelerated. So we're working to improve the tools and the standards and the approaches at the policy level and at the technical level of deploying those things. We want to make sure that we can take advantage of containerized software deployment, containerized orchestration, rather than coding things to run and be vendor locked in single environments. Be able to use commercial orchestration tools, right, as opposed to things that are coded to specific architectures and are very hard to change. So those are another one, particularly relative to the President's 14028 executive order is XBomb, right? As software has become more got larger, deeper stacks. Virtually every commercial system has an abundance of open source software hidden and buried somewhere within it. With XBombs, we're starting to try and get our arms around what constitutes a package. Where do you have vulnerabilities? How do we make use of that? So we're working with our partners in ANS. We're trying to define language for contracts for requesting XBombs and then learning how to use those things. So those are really critical items. There's CIOs leading a group in XBomb definition and an extensible bill of material. So really hugely important area for us to make sure that we understand that software is not an island anymore, right? Part of the connected ecosystem is you're also connected for adversaries. So we have to make sure that we're able to properly understand the security posture and the resilience and the vulnerability of software throughout the stack. And let me see. I think that's probably the key thing that Sean and I have been working on with CIO's help is the API interoperability initiative. We're trying very hard to move forward. We actually did complete, that's one of the things we're already ahead of the I-Plan, where we've completed an initial approach for API adoption Now we're moving into the next level where we're looking more deeply at technical implementation guidance and contractual guidance for bringing forth an API ecosystem, right? So we're all used to, those of us who've developed for a long time, you have an ICD, you develop it, right? You put it on the shelf and it never gets changed, and it's not discoverable, it's not consumable, and outside of the original development, it's not that useful. So what we want to do is have discoverable, consumable APIs to allow the sharing and discovery of data, so the data is not locked up behind kind of a firewall. It's available. A lot of challenges there. Not, security, organizational controls, you name it. There are a lot of, and technology, but that's one of the things that we're getting after in this area. So I think I'm right at 10 minutes. So.
I can say Rob hit 7 minutes almost exactly, and Alan hit 10 minutes exactly. I told him to keep it between 7 and 10. So, Sean, your challenge. It's on to talk about goal 3.
He loves the Irish gift of gab. It's passion and gregariousness there, Dan. So Rob talked about it. So we heard a lot about the infrastructure, the tool chains. We talked about digital engineering, and a lot of this is technology. But technology alone is not going to achieve software modernization. This is really about the people who build the software using those tools and making sure they're enabled to do so, and then having the processes that comport with the strategy as well. So a lot of times when we interact with programs, the thing that we hear is that tech is easy. I don't have a tech problem. I have a people and a process problem. So it's our job to optimize the conditions of the enterprise so that they don't run into these roadblocks. Okay, so we're going to look at 2 processes. We'll first look at that ATO process. Alan hit on it a little bit. And then the software acquisition process, we spoke a bit about the pathway, and then of course the people. So the ATO piece, that's largely understood to be one of the longest lead activities that you have to conduct in order to get software released into production. So the old way involved a 9-month manual process that a security control assessor would go through and have a large batch release that they would confront and go through that process and take a snapshot of the security state at that time. Well, we're moving into a different paradigm where we want to go much faster, and so we have to change the way we do business, and that new way is really an education process for those AOs, where we're going to start to use the things that Alan and Rob talked about. The artifacts that are thrown off the DevSecOps pipeline can be self-served by the security team so that they can analyze those at the pace of the software being released, and if there are exceptions within left and right limits, then they can take action. But otherwise, that should facilitate the trust, and then that starts focusing the security control assessors on true risk management and getting after where the threats are and allowing us to put software into the field. So we have an initial start, so the DoD CISO has started out with some initial, some guidance that was put in the memo in February of 2022. And that basically said that the CISO has the authority to grant this thing called the continuous ATO, which is the gold standard for security that we're going after. And then it talks about the 3 core competencies that are needed to demonstrate in order for you to achieve a continuous ATO. And those are continuous monitoring. Again, that is the real-time telemetry data that gives you a real-time understanding of the security state of your system. So that's the first one. Active cyber defense, we have to be deliberate about detecting and then acting on the threats that we face. And then the DevSecOps reference design compliance. We're on version 2.0 now. It's a set of behaviors and processes and technical designs that comport with the entire philosophy. And the real beauty of that is if you have a DevSecOps compliant design that you've chosen to build, then other authorizing officials can then have the confidence that they trust that you've baked in the behaviors that they respect and they would want to bring into their environment. And so that should allow the reciprocity that's been a real challenge in the department. So in terms of the next steps on this piece, the services are running pathfinders to work out the kinks. They're going to go through and work with the CISO to show that the criteria that they have is met and find out that we have an executable process that we can then scale. Once we learn how we've done with those service pathfinders, that'll all be harmonized into a set of guidance, and then the challenge will be educating the entire formation, all of our authorizing officials on the behaviors that we expect. So that's the first process. That's a key process for the department. There are many others, requirements, cost estimation, interoperability, but we think that's a big one. Okay, so in terms of software acquisition, so we in A&S have put out the Adaptive Acquisition Framework, which is a set of 6 different pathways that a program manager can use to tailor and deliver whatever capabilities they need, if they're hardware intensive, if they're cyber physical. But the newest of those 6 pathways is the software pathway that I spoke about, which is now 2.5 years into operation. And that really sets the conditions that are optimized for cloud-native software delivery. So it's built on Silicon Valley principles. We talked about getting more commercial actors and non-traditionals into development. This is a set of principles that they can relate to. So we're talking about the expectation being agile, DevSecOps, lean, human-centered design. We have a much more flexible requirements process involved with this. And really, warfighter involvement is mandated. It doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but that is actually the secret weapon of the software pathway to reduce risk. And so these behaviors, which are the favorable ones to create rapid and iterative software that responds to the warfighter's priorities and responds to threats, we want to drive this into the rest of the adaptive acquisition framework, and that's going to be our next step. We have some important areas of progress of expanding adoption. Of course, we want to grow the native population from 52 to many more, but to do that, we've created a defense business system subpath, which now avails the software pathway to that community, and we're going to work with the weapon systems to make sure that they understand that this is usable by that community as well, and we're working hard this year to make sure we have a framework for adopting those concepts. But the main thing, in order to understand where we should be driving our process improvements, the first step in our plan here is to get our heads around the metrics and the actual quantitative performance of our software pathway family. So we're going to work with Alan Dianic and the R&E team to make sure that we iterate on our agile metrics so we can gauge performance, understand that the process changes that we're making are going to drive further reforms and streamline our processes. So I would say that was the first step that we're looking to get after here in the I-Plan. The second piece is it's not just about the software pathway. We have to have a better understanding of what other key software-intensive efforts are out there. So we're going to look forward to tagging those efforts and then bringing those metrics and performance tracking to that community beyond the software pathway. So again, we can start to drive and streamline processes in that regard as well. So really, that's part of our key to promote software modernization across all the different pathways. Software contracting best practices, we're running a field survey, we're going after leading edge PMs, we're talking to industry on what are the concepts that are needed to support the rapid deliveries. How are we going to go about modular contracting? Are you aware of different acquisition authorities that are FAR-based and non-FAR-based? We want to package that together to make that life easier for the PM so they have options they understand. And then our partners in CAPE want to understand the cost piece. It's important that we adapt how we do cost estimation in this new paradigm. So CAPE is going to figure out what are the right metrics that we should be tracking from a cost standpoint so we can make sure we have the right resources going to future software programs and support that estimation piece. And finally, on the people side, this is really important. There's a number of activities that we're going to try to make sure we're nurturing our workforce. First of all, we have to understand who the workforce is. Before we do that, we have a set of various different workforce efforts going on in the department. We want to unify those efforts. So an example of that would be the Digital Talent Forum, where we're bringing R&E for software engineering, A&S for software acquisition, and CDO for data and AI. We think those are the key pieces for digital talent, and we want to start to unify and have synergy in the efforts that we're driving for that. Okay, and then the next piece is, do we understand who our digital talent is? We're going to have to understand what the right work roles are that commercial sector has for digital product delivery, then see where in the department we have gaps. And to do that, we're working with our CIO partners through the Defense Cyber Workforce Framework to make sure we have the ability to identify where those skill sets live in a department and then drive human capital initiatives. And then, of course, we have to focus on improving the ability for us to hire. So do hiring managers actually have the toolkits that they need to accelerate hiring? And are we going after the right talent, the pay incentives? We have to get our hand around that. And then, of course, retaining our current workforce. We have to upskill. You're seeing it in private sector, whether it's Amazon or PwC. There's a lot of investment in your employees in this learning economy. We need learning agility, but we have to provide the right software acquisition, engineering, and tech training to our workforce, make that accessible, make that easier for them. And so that's the scoop on processes and people.
All right.
How'd we do?
I clocked that at 9 minutes, so you
Yes.
did good. So I have a bunch of softball questions I could ask these gentlemen that they've all seen in advance, so they've had time to think about it. But I think much more interesting is if you, as the people who are listening here, can challenge them with a question they haven't seen in advance. You can either shout and I'll repeat your question so everyone can hear it because I've got a microphone, or if you want to come to the microphone here, I'm told this is sure in the back. Come on up and Did you ask your question?
So I never got the email with the questions, so
Oh, you didn't. Yeah, Rob says he didn't get it. So
they're all new.
the AV guy told me it was going to be live. Can,
Yes,
he's got to turn it on.
I watched the talk last week. Thank you. Thank you for all your
you.
One of the things, Alan, you covered it, is SBomb, software bill of materials. Guidance, things that I read through, and it says you guys are working on directive guidance. I don't know if that's something you can talk about or if it's decided, as you can decade and a half ago, I worked on ABI, I'm wondering if the SBomb guidance might be in there, if you guys are including ABI as a different about that.
So
Yeah.
I don't think your mic was working, so maybe he can fix that. But I'm going to just kind of try to paraphrase. The question largely was about software bills of materials and how does that interact with the critical technologies guidance. And we could hear it, but
Yeah.
those of you in the back might not have been able to hear the question. So
So yeah, a couple efforts that are underway, and we actually have, it's being led right now by CDAO team. So, and we refer to the overall effort as XBomb, because when we started looking at the executive order on SBomb, we said this is great for software, but we also need them for hardware. We need them for AI. So there's this whole realm of bill of materials activities that we're looking at now to really improve our visibility of our supply chain and provide us a stronger cyber posture as we're moving forward. There is from that team, there is a XBomb strategy that's in coordination in the department right now that sets up across the broad framework for moving forward. Both looking at some of the standards we'd be using, the types of information that would be collected and maintained. We're working on, we're engaged right now with several of the software factories. Producing an SBomb, in this case, is not hard for the modern tools, but producing them is one thing, making them accessible, and then the use cases for using the SBombs are being worked right now. So we're looking at how would we manage the collection, how would we interface with our cyber defenders, how would we coordinate response actions around the SBomb information. So we want to make sure that we're not only setting the standards for collecting those, managing those, maintaining them, but how do we make them accessible for use, and then what are those design patterns? Because we really want to use these to drive a responsive defensive cyber environment. The other piece we're teamed with very closely with CISA. So Alan Friedman's running the effort at CISA. Our A&S team is engaged with FAR work. So we're working at the federal level to implement FAR language for our vendors to create a standard for our vendors to deliver SBomb. We had looked at potentially doing DFAR work, but then that would be trumped by FAR work. And so we've said, nope, let's engage at the federal level and work those processes. So I think that when anything that happens at the federal level and FAR takes, folks that have worked to regulatory action can take a little time. I don't have an update. I was just last week out with Alan, and we had a SBomb community interest out at RSA. So I'll say there's a lot of efforts going on. We are engaged with the vendors, several of the vendors right now on what their SBomb efforts. We're seeing many vendors implement that internally today and getting ready for what would it mean to release an SBomb. I think there's been some pushback from the vendor community. What I expect, having been through SBombs in the past or similar sort of code analysis in the department, it tends to be a shock, right? When folks think they know what's in their software, and then they actually run a structural analysis tool, and it gives them something different, right? So I think we're sort of in that phase now where we recognize the importance of understanding what's in our software builds. And that hopefully if you're in the vendor community and you have not taken a look at what would be in your own SBomb, start taking a look. because it can be really revealing. So I think we're trying to walk this walk with CISA and the federal efforts with our partners on how do we move forward. I'll say the XBomb is one thing. That just tells you what you're getting. The other piece that you'll probably be hearing more about is secure software development framework. So it is one thing to say, here's my software, what its components are. It's another thing to say, I attest that I am implementing secure software development best practices in a way that makes you can have more trustworthiness in the software. We have our DevSecOps guidance lays out what it means to implement secure software development practices in the department. So that's the checklist. That's why it's part of the continuous authorization requirement. It is fully compliant with the NIST 800-218 SSDF framework. We have, I think, more explicit guidance on how to actually implement. But we're also working not just the XBomb, but the SSDF attestations as well. So we will want our in the future moving forward, the vendors not only to say, here's what's in the software I'm giving you, here's my attestation to my development practices, and that I'm implementing secure practices and threat modeling and the whole bit. And so you can have you can trust you have trustworthiness in this product. And then we're working to implement that internally, right, through our DevSecOps practices, laying out both how we integrate with external supply chains, but also our internal supply chains to improve our maturity for delivering secure software.
Alan or Sean, do you have anything you want to add to that? I would say, just as in passing, as my own work as one of the leaders of the Container Governance Task Force, we're looking at using XBombs as a sort of frame for how do we represent the body of evidence for accreditation of software packages. And, essentially we've got a set of standards we came out with last year of sort of guidance on what are the things before you deploy a software container that you should be checking in order to make that reusable in a different context. And largely that was sort of high level guidance. We're now trying to get down to the brass tacks of how do I create a standard for representing that information so that it's consumable by another authorizing official. And the various standards for software bill of materials creates the kind of the perfect construct for that. Because essentially I've already doing the analysis of saying what are all the components that went into my software system, and therefore that gives me a nice place to hang, and here's the testing that I did on those things, whether it be static analysis or dynamic analysis and secrets testing and all sorts of those kinds of things that you would do. So that's a way in which we're proposing to use the various standards for software bill of materials for operational needs, in that case being how do I achieve some level of reciprocity so that when I've done the work to determine that a piece of software is suitable for operational use in one context, that I have that information available for reuse in a different operational context. I'm told that the microphone has had its batteries replaced, and so if there's other questions.
Sorry for the quick follow-up, but I'm looking for anything about a specific policy regime that's going to live in, because the roadmap and the strategy and the plan are nice, but that's not mandatory compliance. So I'm looking for where that.
Yeah, I think it will be in the. Right now, our focus is on the FAR effort. So make it a regulatory requirement to make it applicable across all. We've incorporated it, and we will have guidance. Expanded guidance within the DoD. So the DoD software factories. Here's what this looks like. We're working through the standards with SPDX and Cyclone DX and the formats and management between those two. Right now, because of we have a preference right now for Cyclone DX because it can support the XBomb use cases. Though most of the major software vendors are on SPDX, and we're working with that community we're very interested in the movement to SPDX 3 from the current 2, which we think will give us more flexibility. So we don't want to be in a standards war. Right now, we are working with CISA to hopefully put more pressure on the vendors so we can get more lossless communications between those two standards. Right now, you lose a lot of information. We can translate, but some information is lost. But I think that will have to be an engagement with the community as we move forward, right? There's a third standard, but really everybody's using SPDX or Cyclone DX. We are engaging with several of the folks in the software factories that are implementing them today to see where do we need to start extending beyond the core standard that CISA's defined. We are looking at things like, if I'm deploying the software on board a ship or other things, can we start to extend these so we have more awareness of where the software actually exists for response actions? And we're also pushing hard to start incorporating VEX standards. So it's one thing to have an XBomb and then to map a CVE against it. It's another thing to say whether that vulnerability is exploitable or not. VEX is an emerging standard right now to give us not just the vulnerability, but the exploitability as well. We think we'll need to maintain those two as two separate facts because the exploitability may change or be different in different situations. XBombs could be more static, but this is part of our engagement with the defensive cyber communities, right? How do we make this information available, and how do we start to coordinate response actions in more dynamic ways? Dan mentioned the Container Governance Task Force. We're now running situations where we are reusing containers broadly across the community, and so we found just recently in the past few weeks when we have a vulnerability that triggers, and now we're waiting for a vendor to do a patch. How do we communicate upstream to relying parties that are also using that? Here's who has responsibility for the response action. Here's when we expect something to be done. Here's the impact we think this has, and appropriate action on their behalf. And these things will potentially, we're now seeing 70 plus CVEs per day. So you can imagine this is going to be a more dynamic environment than we've currently tailored our defensive response actions on software updates to deal with at this point. So an interesting time.
Sir. Hi there, David Zhang. First of all, thank you guys so much for doing this and taking the time and even missing the coffee break to help us answer some questions here. One of the pain points I've heard is from the business owners, and specifically capturing their requirements and doing so as those requirements evolve. Would love to know what are the different models that you guys have seen on how the DoD is capturing those requirements from the mission owners, what's been effective and what's been less effective.
Yeah, I could take a shot at that. So we practice human-centered design in the software acquisition pathway, and most of our systems are C2 and decision support. We have a few weapon systems that are exploring it and a few business systems that are exploring it. But I think in general, the insight that we have right now is that the warfighters, different user in your case, combat support versus, say, pilots from the 160th SOAR or various different forward deployed folks, is that their involvement in prioritizing, first of all, you have a broad framework. So we have a capability need statement in the software pathway that's very high level that allows for discovery as you go into development. There's an expectation that you're going to experience learning, and that learning should inform dynamic requirements. That's really what we're focused on. So dynamic backlogs, typical agile product management is what we're focused on and putting in the policy, but that should follow from a very high level capability needs statement that doesn't lock you into early design trades, doesn't lock you into specifications that you would have to adhere to. Certainly quantitative information is important, but you want to leave room for some discovery. And the only way you can get after that, and the best way we've seen based on our interactions with the warfighters that support these system development, is allowing for that dynamic process to play out and capture those in roadmaps. I don't know if there's any other requirements, pieces of that, Alan, that you wanted to add.
Well, one of the challenges obviously in the department is we've become very enamored with kind of the requirement as the coin of the realm. And so the part of what's going on within our organization is to evolve the system engineering discipline to adapt to and accept the concept of agile requirements development, right? Identifying at the top level capabilities that are required, that are needed, and then have a learning process that allows you to build that and not sort of define a comprehensive set of the ultimate requirements that you'll deliver in 5 years. It's really something that's nearer term, iterative, is tolerant of sort of early failure, early learning. I think that's one of the keys that we're trying to drive home, is that the process needs to be a learning process. It's not just focused on repeatably delivering something, because you can be very repeatable at delivering the wrong thing, which is not a sane process. So it's really making use of the tools through software factories to rapidly deploy and iteratively deploy software without having to worry about defining every requirement prior to deployment. So I think the concept of defining requirements is there. It's not the process that we've seen. That's the direction that we're trying to go. It's not the process that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, my experience in developing systems in the department has always been we tried to couple too much, and we coupled them around the milestones, right? So whether that was a requirements decision with our CDDs and other things, right? Or from the JSIDS process to kicking off the acquisition to coupling funding decisions and color money decisions, and then we coupled that with engineering. And I always felt like engineering can move faster than the department can move from either a funding or a top-level requirements approval process. So I think the interesting challenge for us as we move into this agile world is how do we decouple those processes where needed and allow freedom of maneuver where possible, but also keep those key decision points for these are the absolute high-level requirements or key funding decisions for the particular program, and then allow the engineering, the development, delivery, production teams to move at whatever speed they're able to move within that framework. And so I think with the work Sean you've been doing and on the acquisition pathway, and then Alan, the work you've been doing with how we incorporate the R&E aspects into this, we have models now on how we can do it from a contracting perspective, how we can do it from a technology delivery perspective. Sean, I know you've been engaged heavily with the joint staff on JSIDS.
Absolutely.
How do we adapt JSIDS so we can set the top level framework for this is the warfighting mission capability that needs to be there, but then we can get MVPs out early and continue to adapt with direct user feedback to hit those milestones moving forward, and then building in the funding models that give the programs the flexibility to be adaptive within the space.
All right, we are almost out of time. And since we don't have anybody waiting the microphone, I'm going to ask one last question. I know we have two different military veterans up here on the stage. So, and I think it's useful to try to put this kind of abstract talk about how do we do software modernization in the context of how does this transformation work and activities affect the men and women on the front line, and how do you measure that? How do you know? Why don't we start with Sean?
Yeah, I have to go back to my experience with the 160th out of SOCOM, and it's something interesting that you see when you have human-centered design involved. The pilots see from the engineers that the feedback that they're giving them is taken seriously and will result in something that will make them have better lethality, make them more survivable, or reduce their burden, and they take that deadly serious. In turn, the engineers see that the work that they do is satisfying something that they signed up to do, which is to make sure the folks that are going in harm's way are getting what they need for the fight. And so you see this virtuous cycle where folks who are involved with that, the morale increases and it gets more folks that are involved, different stakeholders, to participate in the shift left. And I think that's the gratifying piece, is seeing things like the software pathway motivating, making sure that the warfighter is getting what they need to go fight.
That's a great answer. Do you guys have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, I'll just say, so in terms of the specific metrics, we had early on, as this community focused on sort of the DORA as a lower level. We are now trying to move to full value stream delivery, so you're capturing, you only get credit when you actually deliver to the warfighters or the end user. I will say we are see some challenge spaces as we move some of the big legacy systems from that are mission critical implemented today to move and adapt these agile processes, especially as we start to incorporate the operations production environment as a first class citizen within the pipeline. There's some learning challenges. We have big complex legacy systems, and there's we're starting to see some of the friction points and starting to learn some of the models that we need to go after to solve some of that. But we're also seeing where, like on the weapon system side, legacy weapon systems that are now being extended with new capabilities being fielded very rapidly onto platforms that are older than I am, like B-52 and F-16s, right? And it's fascinating to watch, and how we're using DevSecOps approaches, hardware in the loop, model-based system engineering, digital twins, now to really shorten that delivery cycle to get updates into and to extend the life and usefulness of these platforms. We see folks doing things like pulling data off of these platforms and putting them into AI analysis so they can see which buttons the pilot was pushing after flights, and then optimize the screens based on user behaviors in ways that before that data was being dumped, right? The plane would land, we dump the data, and now we're pulling it into, the Air Force SWAGs are doing some just amazing work in this space, into AI analysis to then optimize user interface design and other things, and then get that back into the weapon system immediately. It's really fascinating work. But so we have both some of these challenges of these big legacy systems, but also some bright stars on how we need to move forward. There is work to be done.
So I'll just add to it. I think there's an important word, and this comes from my 30 years of developing, right? Looking back at projects, programs that were most successful, it was partnership. I think that's one word, is when we had very direct access to our customers, we could iterate quickly and we could show things to them and they could tell us what they did. I think one of the things I learned as a software engineer early is your opinion doesn't matter, right? It's your customer and what they need that's important. And I can tell you, I had business multiple times for redoing systems that were delivered, met DT requirements, and never went into operations because they were considered not operationally acceptable. And so I just simply asked, why is that wrong? Show me the bad one, why is it wrong? And usually it was a fairly simple answer. And somebody didn't ask that question. And there's some process steps in between the people building stuff and the people using stuff. So to me, it was really just partnership, right? The closer, the better partners we have, a partnership we have between the government, the mission, the PMO, the contracts folks, and the developer, all of those people, the better partnership you have, you're going to be able to deliver faster, right? Whatever term you want to use. I can remember doing things before Agile was a thing, even though we started with XP. We sort of did things that way because we were allowed to, right? We didn't have the contractual, we had flexibility. The organizations gave us flexibility to look the other way a little bit and allowed us to just work directly with the customers. And when we did that, we had a better outcome. When we didn't do that, I can remember being brought onto a very large program, and our group was part of the fourth replan when 3 previous plans of this major program failed, right? Well, why is it happening? Well, because there was no communication. And finally they said, go talk to the customer, find out what they want, and just do that. So I think that's to me, that's a key concept. It's just fundamentally it's partnerships, working together, right? That which separates us is bad, that which brings us together is good.
And with that, we are over time, and I want to thank you all for your attention and thank the panelists for their insights. And also thank the AV guy for helping us out, and for some of our contract support who loaned us a laptop. So thank you all, and have a great AFCEA TechNet week.